Welcome back to the channel, guys. My name's Gareth, this is Tech Check. Today we've got another PC build, and it's quite special really because it's for a Christmas present, but it's also featuring this Corsair 4000X that everybody loves. So if you're interested, stick around. We're going to be going through a full step-by-step build process. Before we actually get into the build, guys, we just want to spend a couple of minutes just running down these particular parts, giving you an insight to what we're actually using. And if you are interested in any of these parts, you will find a link down below in the description. So just a heads up, all of these parts are brand new with the exception of the graphics card. Obviously, we're all aware of the demand and availability of said GPUs at this moment in time. So that's the reason why we've gone for a 1660 Super. So this card's still going to be fantastic for 1080p. And for anyone that's on a tighter budget, this should offer exactly what you're looking for. With that being said, we're going to be using none other than the Corsair 4000X case in white. Absolute massive favourite for this particular case. I absolutely love it, guys. Not only is it so easy to build in, but the looks on the thing is absolutely top notch as well. So we're going to be using this again. In terms of all-in-one, we've gone for the H100I Elite Capellix. Again, you will know, guys, that I've got the H150i. Big fan of Corsair all-in-ones. Not only do they offer fantastic aesthetics, they do a really good job at keeping those CPUs nice and cool. And not only that, because it is Corsair, it's going to nicely sync up with this 4000X case. With that in mind, we've also got an additional SP120, which we are going to put in the back of this case. The all-in-one at the top of the case has 2 exhausts as well. So all in all, we should have 6 fans, 3 as an intake, 2 at the top as an exhaust, and 1 at the back, giving us a balanced pressure. So we shouldn't be sucking up too much of that dirty air and stuff like that. So it should stay pretty clean as well. With that in mind, our CPU of choice is this AMD Ryzen 5 5600X, 6-core, 12-thread, absolute monster. And, well, we've done loads of builds with this, guys. Really decent FPS at 1080p or 1440p. And at the price point that we're currently paying, around £200 to £220, I don't think there is a better CPU out there at this moment in time for that. Yes, the new Intel 12600 is an absolute beast if you can actually find it in stock. And with the cost of the motherboards taken into consideration, I still think B550 or X570 along with the 5600X, you can't go wrong. That brings us really nicely onto this MSI MPG B550 Gaming Plus motherboard, guys. Really nice, feature-rich board. Whether you're looking for connectivity for RGB, whether you're looking for fan header connections, whether you're looking for M.2 or NVMe connections, this has kind of got it all. On top of that, you can also do your Mystic Light RGB stuff as well. On the back here, it's got the Gen 4 PCIe. It's also got extended heat sinks over the VRMs, loads of shields for the M.2s, and then you've got your LED controls and stuff like that. So overall, really nice, really good B550 motherboard, and that will really pair nicely with this 5600X. I always say, guys, when we're talking about power supplies, you're spending over £1,000 on a system, don't cheap out. It's the thing that powers everything else, and if you've ever got a problem, this is going to be the first thing that will cause any issues with regards to things breaking. So invest in a decent power supply, and this is none other than the RM650. Really good modular power supply, 10-year guarantee, decent cables and decent connectivity here as well. So all in all, really nice power supply. That moves us nicely onto our RAM. Again, we've stuck with the theme of Corsair. You might think this is sponsored by Corsair, but it's not. It's just the fact that because the case runs so nicely with the all-in-one and the power supply, we've got some fantastic deals. So this is the Vengeance RGB Pro. Again, really nice kit, guys. 16 gigs of 3200 megahertz at C16. So fantastic RAM kit there, and you can't go wrong whether you're using it for Ryzen or whether you're going to be using it for Intel. So all good. Moving on to storage, guys, we've got this SanDisk X600 SSD here, M.2 drive. going to be working perfectly for our Windows boot drive here. So not in terms of capacity, but we don't need a huge amount for that. 256 gig is plentiful there. We could potentially put one of our most used games on here as well. But what we are also going to be installing is another NVMe drive, and that's from WD Blue. It's a 1TB SN570. Absolutely fantastic deal on that on the Black Friday sales. Still Gen 3, but 1TB means that we've not got our nasty SATA cables or 2.5-inch drives. This is going to be perfect. Full connectivity through this B550 motherboard. So now that we've got a list of all the parts out the way, let's get building. Installing our CPU, we want to open the socket by pulling up the retention arm. We then want to match the triangle that's on the CPU with the triangle that's on the socket itself. We can then lower the CPU down into position, and we can lock it into place by pulling down the retention arm. Moving on to the RAM, we'll populate slots 2 and 4. We can do this by putting our RAM stick in, making sure it's orientated the correct way, and then even pressure on both sides of the RAM stick until you hear a click. We can then move on to our boot drive, so we can do that by removing the 2 screws on top of the heatsink, which will expose our NVMe or M.2 drive. We can then place the M.2 at an angle into the socket, and we can screw it down utilizing the M.2 screw. We have to remember to remove the film on the back of the actual M.2 shield. We can then replace the heat shield and populate the 2 screws we've just removed. We can then follow the same process with our bottom M.2 drive, placing it into the socket and securing it into place with our M.2 screw. Before we install our motherboard, we want to ensure if we haven't got an integrated I/O shield, we go ahead and install that now. We can then lower our motherboard into the case, ensuring that all the holes line up with the standoffs. Secure the motherboard in place utilizing the 9 screws. Please make sure you're using the correct screws in order to avoid damage. A magnetic screwdriver really does come in handy here. Working outside in always helps also. So if you followed along, guys, I'm hoping that you'll agree it's starting to come together quite nicely. We've got our motherboard successfully installed into this beautiful 4000X case. We've got our RAM, CPU and 2 M.2 drives, which we did previously, successfully installed onto the motherboard. Before we installed the motherboard, we ensured that our I/O shield was successfully installed because we didn't want any mishaps there. And I'm hoping you'll see where I'm actually going with this, guys. We've got this stunning black RGB Elite fans at the front, which we're going to echo at the rear. We've got this black MPG B550 motherboard, and we've got this white Corsair Pro RAM, which is nicely installed, along with this white case. So the effect that we're looking for here is the black and white theme. So we're going to be adding additional hardware to this case that will hopefully follow along within the same theme. But next step is to install our H100i at the top as a rear exhaust, and that's what we'll go ahead and do now. So talking about the H100i, guys, I'm a big fan of this as well. Absolutely fantastic cooler. It's a 240mm all-in-one cooler, all in white. The tubes are white. It's got this stunning front here, which we can obviously change with regards to the USB 2 header off our motherboard software within icue, and the fans are actually white as well. So a little bit of a contrast to the rest of the fans which are currently in the build already. But well, let's open this up. Let's go ahead and show you guys how to install it, and hopefully we won't encounter any issues in terms of clearance with those VRMs and things like that. So taking this out of the actual case itself, or box, we can also see that this H100i capellix comes with this included commander core. Now this is absolutely fantastic, guys, due to the fact that this can actually run 6 RGB fans as well as 6 PWM fan connections as well. So even though this 4000X comes with a RGB hub included, we can actually disconnect that and take it out of the case, so we've only got one SATA connection, and then we can actually run this commander core, which will sync up much nicer to icue and allow us to control all of the RGB fans together, and as well as power them as well. And this is everything that you're going to require, guys, to successfully install this into your case. So we've got our radiator and our pump our two fans and then our AM4 mounting brackets. Now, a couple of things to note here, guys. It does come already installed with the Intel bracket installed. That can be easily removed by just removing those two brackets on the side, just like that. So once you've removed those Intel brackets, guys, what we can go ahead and do is install our AM4 brackets. Now, ensure that they are being installed in the correct way. You want them facing up with the brackets facing down. On the back of them, they actually do have some writing on the back, just to ensure that you are installing them correctly as well. So now that our AM4 brackets are successfully installed, guys, what we need to go ahead is install our little, should we say, hooks to allow us to actually connect the pump to the actual socket itself, and therefore just be very careful of this thermal paste which is already pre-applied on the back of this block here. So very, very straightforward, guys. All we've got to do is put through one of the hooks, lay this to one side, and then we just need to utilize one of the thumb screws and screw it on. This will allow us to apply the correct clamping force and make sure that we are not having any issues with regards to the thermals with regards to the CPU. So carry out the same task on the other side, and once you've done that, we'll go ahead and install the fans. So a common mistake here, guys, is using the incorrect screws when mounting the fans to the actual radiator. So a couple of things that we need to take into consideration here, guys. First of all, we need to ensure that our fan orientation is correct. So we're going to be putting this at the top of the case. So we want it as an exhaust. So we need to ensure that our fans are in a push or an exhaust configuration. The other thing we want to note here, guys, is we want to ensure that the fan cable is coming out at the back of the actual case. Now, if that's coming into the top of the case, we need to ensure that this is on this side over here. Okay, so when we turn it round and put it into the top of the case, the cables are at the back, so we can easily cable manage them. Now, if we're going to be installing our fans on this side of the radiator, we need to be utilizing the longer screws. So they go through the actual fan itself and then into the actual radiator. If we're going to be utilizing and securing the the radiator to the top of the case, then we need to be using the smaller screws. Just be very, very careful. Do not use these larger screws to go through the top of your case to install the radiator or to secure it to the case. That is what the smaller screws are for. If you are to use the larger ones, there's a very good chance that you're going to pierce this fin stack and potentially cause damage to this all-in-one cooler. So if you followed along, guys, we've got our two fans successfully installed in the correct orientation in an exhaust position. We've got our two cables off of each fan coming out of the back of the actual radiator so that we can cable manage it correctly. And then we've got our mounting mechanism secured in place for AM4 connections. So just a couple of things to note here, guys. There is this pin off of the pump here. It looks like it's a 24 pin, which will successfully connect into our commander core. And then we've also got our CPU fan header, which will need to be connected to our CPU header on our motherboard. But other than that, guys, hopefully you followed along and everything's been self-explanatory. We have also got just to the right down here 8 more screws as well as 8 more washers, which we're going to utilize by basically pushing the fan and the radiator to the top of the case and then pushing the actual screws through the outer of the case into holding this actual radiator into the case as well. So fingers crossed there is no clearance issues, but we'll go ahead and install that now. Grab hold of your cooler, guys. Ensure that you're just being careful with regards to it. I always like placing it inside of my actual case so I've got an extra hand spare. And then all we're simply going to do is remove that Intel cover, and then you can see we've not smudged any of the thermal paste itself. And then as you can see here on our motherboard, we've got one hook here and one hook here. And what we're simply going to do, guys, is hook each one of those under those 2 hooks there and tighten them down to make sure we've got this clamping pressure which is required for our CPU. Now, there is a couple of options here, guys, okay? So when we come to install this, I like to install these in this configuration here because I don't like the cables running across my RAM. Now the other option is you could, if you really wanted to, you could have it in this configuration like this, but then that would mean the cables are running straight across your RAM and stuff like that. I don't tend to like that. So we're going to do it in the other configuration, and we're going to install it a little bit like that. It just means that our all-in-one pipe's a little bit tighter and a little bit more neater. And then we can go ahead and tighten this side up. And what you will see, guys, in a couple of minutes, well, in a couple of seconds, is this will even itself out and it will center itself. What we're looking to do here, guys, is just tighten this up to a point where it's finger tight and you'll know not to go any further. Do one side and then do the other. So now that we've got our cables all untangled, shall we say, what we want to ensure, guys, is that this is pushed through the back of the case with the rest of the fan cables. But before we install the radiator, I want to install the CPU header. We've got system fan 1, CPU optional, and then CPU fan. Okay, now what we want to do is install it onto our CPU fan header, and then we can push this cable through with the rest of them, and that means that we're not going to be struggling when the radiator is actually installed, actually trying to get that onto the header. Now that our cables are pushed all the way through, we can go ahead and populate all 8 of these screws with the actual washers on, and that will secure it into place. Now you will notice at the top of this 4000X case there is one mounting position which is further back, and then there's one further forward. This is to help facilitate a little less additional room for the VRMs, or if you've got high profile memory. So a washer and a screw, guys, and then we can go ahead. I wouldn't tighten these all the way down. What we want to ensure is that we get a couple of them in first, and then once we've got that in position, then you can go ahead and actually start tightening them down. Woo! Look at this baby. So guys, if you follow along, this is what it's going to look like so far. Mwah! Absolutely beautiful. So this H100, we've had to actually install as close to the front of the case as we can because of this RGB Pro RAM. Absolutely stunning, guys. White on white. Oh, it looks absolutely beautiful. But essentially, we've orientated our all-in-one this way, so our cables are coming off this side. You can, as we said previously, do it the other side, but the cables would be coming across the RAM. I'm not a huge fan of it, but each to their own. But essentially, guys, yeah, that's our H100i nicely and secured in place. What we've got then, guys, is essentially we've got our 2 cables, PWM and RGB header for each fan. And then we already installed our CPU header, and I've just pushed the actual excess of the cable through. And then we've got our 24 pin to power our pump, which is just there. So what we're looking to do, and I know this is the part, guys, that everybody gets really confused, okay, because it's RGB and everybody likes to get it all working correctly. Now, what we can do is we can go ahead and we can actually uninstall this one here, because we're not going to actually need it, because, well, we've got everything that we need all included in this Commander core here. So we're going to go ahead and uninstall this one that was already included. So we're going to uninstall number 1, number 2, and number 3 in terms of RGB cables. There we go. And then we can go ahead and remove that out of here. Fantastic. Right, there we go. So just untangle that, and then we can remove that actual RGB controller from the actual case in total. Okay, so essentially, guys, all that we're going to be doing is we're going to be connecting all 6 RGB connections to this Commander core, and all 6 of the fans to this fan headers on this Commander core as well. That's then connected via a USB 2 header on our motherboard, so we can control it via icue, and it's powered via SATA power cable. Okay, so very, very straightforward. We've got 2 pieces of 3M tape, which we're going to install at the back here, and then we're just going to stick that onto that nice flat surface there. And then what we're going to do is connect up the RGB, because when it comes to RGB, you need to have it all in sync. So RGB 1, fan 2, fan 3, fan 4, fan 5, fan 6. If you've got any chaser effects, it won't look right if they're not all connected correctly. And not only that, 9 out of 10 times it doesn't actually work correctly because you've got them out of sync. So if you put fan 1 in fan 3 and fan 3 in fan 1, nothing will work absolutely at all because, well, the headers don't correspond to where they're actually plugged into. So let's ensure that that's all done correctly. So first things first, let's remove this SSD tray, and we'll go ahead and we'll install this commander core in the back of the case. What we're looking to do then, guys, is just nicely secure this into position somewhere around here. That would be just as good as anywhere here. That's absolutely perfect. Nicely just there. And then that way we can run down to SATA cable. We can run the USB 2 header just underneath here and into there. All good. So what we need to do then, guys, is we just need to differentiate between our different RGB connections. So this one's fan number 3, so that can go in fan 3, and that only leaves fan number 1, which can go in there. So when it comes down to powering the actual fans, guys, now that we've got 1, 2 and 3 into position, when it comes to the PWM headers, we don't have to worry about them being in order. Now, seeing as this one's slightly tight, what we can do is we can go ahead and install this one into number 1. Just like that. That's number 1. We've got a little more slack on this one here, so, and this one here, so I'll utilize this one in number 2, like that, and then this one in number 3, like that. And then what we can do is just tidy these cables up as much as possible with the rest of these here. Before we do that though, guys, I just want to connect this 24 pin to our commander core. There is a little bit of a grey, I don't know what it is, just basically a grey square there. There is a grey square on the commander core as well, and that will identify which side it will go in. So that's nicely installed, and again, we can cable manage that afterwards as well. We then move on to our fans at the top in our all-in-one. This is our fan number 4. And this one is going to be our fan number 5, which only leaves fan number 6, which is our rear exhaust fan. So now that we've got our commander core installed, guys, we've got fan number 1, fan number 2, fan number 3, fan number 4 and fan number 5. So there are our RGB connections. We've got our PWM for 1, 2 and 3 already installed. All we've got to do now is go ahead and install our PWMs for fans 4 and 5 on our all-in-one cooler. And that just leaves RGB number 6 and PWM header connection 6 for our exhaust fan as well. Next thing we're going to be doing then, guys, installing this rear exhaust fan. So follows the exact same premise, just 4 screws into the back of the actual case, through the back of the case, holding the actual rear exhaust fan in place. On the back of this RGB Pro fan, we've got a PWM and an actual RGB header as well that we need to connect into the back of our commander core. So very, very straightforward. This is exactly the same fan that we've got at the front. The only difference being is they are white on the actual cooler itself. So no difference here whatsoever. Same connections, and all we're going to do is install it as an exhaust, making sure that our cables are coming from the back of the fan. So we want to ensure that it's installed up here nicely so we can manage those cables, and then 4 screws through the back of there holding it in. So go ahead, guys, and untangle your cables, take off the zip ties and stuff like that. Now, it's very important, guys, that you utilize the correct cables. Never mix power supply cables for different power supplies. Even if it's the same brand, you can get away with it sometimes, but sometimes the pinouts are completely different. So please bear in mind that this one is a PCIe, basically for our graphics card. We need to ensure that it's being plugged into the correct connections, which is just here as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and connect that into the bottom down here. So that's our GPU sorted. We're then going to use this one, which is for SATA power, which we can go ahead and install into this one down here. We've then got our 24 pin, which is quite self-explanatory. It's the biggest one on the board. It requires 2 connections. Make sure they're nicely into position, which they are, which is fine. And then our last connection is our 8-pin for our CPU. Now again guys, you will see that one says CPU, the other one doesn't have any markings on, so make sure that you are utilizing the correct side. And that is all of our connections that we're going to require today. And if your fan is going to be located upwards, on this particular case it doesn't really matter because there's actually a vent there, but underneath this case we've actually got a filter, so we need to be installing our fan facing downwards so it's drawing fresh air or exhausting warm air out of the bottom of that actual case. So installing it guys, all we've got to do is push it in from the side. So that's successfully installed there. Did experience a little bit of an issue there because the drive cage for the hard drives, we didn't move it across. Now you can do that, it does give you a little bit of flexibility to actually move that, but all we need to do now guys is install the 4 screws that are included. So there's a couple of things guys that I like to do straight off the bat here. The first thing is I want to ensure that our CPU cable has got a sufficient amount of space and room in order to actually reach all the way up here, okay? So I like to ensure that that's not going to get tangled or anything like that, and I will go ahead and I'll push that directly straight through to the other side of the case. I will then also ensure that all the other cables are out the way of the 24 pin and that we can successfully pass that through as well to the front of the case. And then we've only got one connection on this actual SATA power connector. So all I'm going to do there is I'm going to push the excess into the bottom of the case, ensuring that we've got one left over where we can actually power this commander core, and then we can leave that hanging out, which is just here. In fact, we'll go ahead and we can connect that already. So all we've got to do is push that together, and then we can actually successfully push that out of the way, and that's one less cable we've got dangling out of the back of the case. And then our last one guys, which is our PCIe power cable for our graphics card. We can either push that through where our where our front I/O went, or we can push it around the side where our USB Type-C connection is. I'm yet to decide on how I want to route this cable, so we're just going to leave this one here for now. But what we are going to do is we're just going to go ahead and we're going to tie down the power cable for our CPU and just manage these cables a little bit more on the right hand side, and then we can go ahead and make those connections on the front of the motherboard. So in terms of our connections at the front here guys, I've decided to push the PCIe cable for our graphics card through the bottom down here rather than coming around the corner. Our 24 pin, all we need to do is bend that around and attach that successfully by pushing it into place like so, and then we can push the excess back through the back, and then we've got our 8 pin which needs to be connected just down here in this corner. Now what you will see guys is that we've got our radiator installed here, and what I have done is I've untightened it and just slid it all the way as far as I can to this side to allow me sufficient room to be able to connect this. Now as you can see, my hands are not going to fit in that tight gap down there. So one mistake that we have done is we should have passed through and connected that EPS power cable before we installed the radiator, unless you've got mega baby hands, and then you can reach them in and actually connect it, because I thought that we would have sufficient room. But not to worry, you can just uninstall some of the screws on the back side of this actual radiator, and then we can connect it and then reinstall it. So last and final step guys is your graphics card. Now very, very straightforward in order to install that. What we need to do is we need to install or remove, shall we say, slots 2 and 3 of these slots at the back, PCIe slots or little brackets, and then that will allow us to actually install our graphics card correctly. These always fall off. Watch. So very straightforward guys. Make sure that our PCIe lane is open, and we just want to offer up our graphics card to that lane. All we have to ensure then guys is we push and wait for a click. There we go. And then all we've got to do is put the 2 thumb screws back in place, securing our graphics card in place. We can then attach our PCIe power cable. We're finally there guys. So all installed, all good. Now all we've got to do is put the glass panel on the front, the rear panel back on, and then I've already attached a little bit of power here, and then we'll go ahead, we'll turn it on, we'll attach a monitor and just make sure that we hit that post screen. Now, all we have done is we've carried forward a 256 gig SSD that I pre-installed Windows on before. So I don't know whether we'll hit BIOS or whether we'll go straight into Windows. I'm yet to find out. But nevertheless, I'm not hoping for any issues, put it that way. So let's get these panels back on. Woo! There we go. Right. Just turn it slightly to this side for you guys. So we've got our 3 fans at the front working, our 2 fans at the top working, and then we've got our rear fan, which is working also. So our RGB is working, our pump's connected, and I can hear the 1660 Super all working as well. Let's do a quick peel. And we can see that we've successfully hit the BIOS as well. So we'll go into that and hopefully, guys, yeah, there we go. No problems whatsoever. Straight into this B550 BIOS. Here, I just want to make a few changes to the boot drives, and there we can actually load on XMP and change anything that we wish to do so. But essentially, guys, that's it in a nutshell. As always, this is an absolute starter building. If you're a first time builder, guys, and you're looking for a case that's going to make it as easy as possible, then I cannot tell you to build in anything else, because it is an absolute pleasure to build in, okay? Not only does it look great, not only is it easy to build in, it's just absolutely fantastic. All I can say to you guys is, I hope that you've enjoyed the video. If you've got any questions whatsoever, leave them down in the comments section below. All the links for the parts that we've used in this build are going to be down there below as well. That's it from me. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next one.